Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well. It is Thursday of week 7, and as promised, a couple more videos going out about a few things that I wanted to talk to you about, um, and to help you along, in this case, with your final paper. And I haven't received a lot of questions. I had a couple questions a couple weeks ago, and then I had a question from somebody this week, but then they didn't respond back, so we sort of lost touch. I'm kind of waiting on a response. But I had planned anyway to just do some talking about what we're looking for in the final paper, because I think there's always confusion in some respects. So let me talk a little bit about it, try to offer some advice, and tell you I'm around this weekend, generally answering emails. I'm happy to try to answer questions by email or other if you'd like. So we're interested here in an influencer campaign, but I can tell you from experience that these papers tend to be a little more all over the map, and that's fine. Here is from early in the semester. We're creating an influencer campaign for a brand that includes awareness, identity, audience building, talking a lot about audience and then engagement and issues like that. So, what to do? How do I put this together? Well, the answer is that you decide. That seems like a cop out, but what it means is that if you have developed opinions about the material you're looking at, that can be your paper. And I'll talk more about that in just a second. But um, students who have developed strong opinions, they've seen things and they're reacting to them, are in better shape than students who are not reacting to them. And you can let that guide the organization of your particular paper. So for this paper, I encourage you to use an executive summary, one page. An executive summary should never be longer than one page. And because of the nature of the sort of document we're producing, which is a more professional document, an executive summary kind of makes sense. So if you don't want to do it, you don't have to, but I encourage you to. And the executive summary can lay out the points that you want to make, and then you make those points in the paper in the order in which you discuss them in the executive summary. And I do think that this can help you then organize your thoughts, group them together logically, and it gets us away from a little bit more of this kind of um, essay or research paper organization that some of your papers will not be like at all. And that too is just fine. So consider an executive summary, should never be longer than a page. And I should be able to understand entirely everything on that page without looking to the other paper. That's an important point. So if you make a claim in the executive summary, you say, here's a statement of something we saw, I should be able to understand that one pager entirely without having to go deeper into the paper to figure out what's going on. Because truthfully, in the professional world, most of your audience is only going to read your executive summary. And that 50-page paper that you write behind it is just never going to get looked at. That's sad but true. All right, so if you, for example, want to do an influencer campaign, you would have your executive summary, and that would be the one page. And the next page would be some sort of introduction, typically, a paragraph or so. It doesn't matter if it runs a little long. And that introduction would go through and say, here is what this paper is going to state. So in that sense, it can kind of mirror or reflect a bit of what's in the executive summary. You might then include the background of your organization. Most of you have at least a page, sometimes 2 or 3 pages of background on the organization. If you've got too much or if you're wondering what to cut, remember that the background, the foundational material, should serve the rest of the paper. So if you decide you need to cut some stuff and you're thinking what to cut, well, that background should lay out what's important later on in the paper. If your background runs long, I don't mind at all. You might then talk about current issues facing the organization, talk about the influencers that you used, what they're producing, what sort of crises they might lead you into or encounter, et cetera. Suggestions for improvement, proposed content, the audience that they're reaching, and a proposed campaign. So I've talked to a couple people who say, here's what these influencers are talking about. Here's what they're doing for my organization. They have an opinion about what's happening. That is the statement around which your paper can be built, to say, this organization has been using influencers. Here's what they're currently doing. Here's what we need them to do. This paper is going to suggest ways in which to do it. That's it. There's a paper. And your structure, your approach could be completely different from someone else who saw different things in the influencers, who maybe wants to focus on audience, or maybe wants to focus on crises, or maybe wants to focus on the differences in content across platforms or something else. So we'll see lots of different organizations. Some people have a situation where they have a variety of observations, and I think that this is still fine to use as an organizing structure around a paper. So I've seen papers where in the executive summary, they'll say, this paper is going to review 3 items. First, we're going to talk about the current influencers we use and the content we're producing. Secondly, we're going to talk about the audiences we're reaching and audiences that we need to reach. And finally, we're going to talk about, and they find something else. That's fine. Now, for an academic research paper, I might say, well, those 3 items don't go together. But this is more of a report on influencers and social media and content that you've looked at. And my report has these 3 main points. Fine. It's a fine way to organize your paper. Make sure you deal with all the 3 points you say you're going to deal with them and deal with them in the order within which you state. So in this case, our executive summary, at the beginning, we could talk about our current influencers. We could talk about audiences we think we're reaching, audiences we think we're not reaching. And then we could talk about perhaps how our influencers should respond to a current issue. That's fine. Some of the common problems that I see, do look again at my video on formatting, which came out last week. We have this flexibility. So APA style, the academic style that I live and breathe in, that I write all my papers in, is double-spaced, etc., double-spaced, indented paragraphs, etc. Because a lot of these papers tend to look more like corporate reports, I'm not really worried as much about that, but they need to look good. APA style is an easy way to make your paper look good, but if you don't want to use it, that's fine. You can single space, etc. But it does need to look good. Your mechanics must be perfect. Okay, spelling, punctuation, grammar has to be perfect. We're writing at a professional level here. Organization is really important, and you might consider using subheadings as an easy way for you to organize your work. That's one of the benefits of sort of professional documents. They're very clearly organized, big subheadings, easy for you to reference, to get right into that document, find exactly what you want. That's something academic writing doesn't do nearly as well. Minor issues do become important here. So I saw a couple content maps that went by, and I was able to praise some things about what these students had worked on. That's fine. But I also saw in the content maps, and I pointed out to these students that they had dumped a few things in because they didn't know what else to do. They dumped in some boilerplate. Parts of the content maps were empty or something like that. You can't do that in the final paper. So if you had trouble with the content map, well, draw from it what you can, and you don't need to include that in your final paper. If you had a lot of success with your content map and you think this illustrates a point that is worthwhile in your paper, use it. Go ahead. You can use graphics, but you don't have to. But you can't put in pablum, you can't put in filler in this final paper. I will catch it. So please be careful of that. I had a couple students who in the past have fallen into that trap. You might try to do this in chunks. Think about those 3 or 4 main points that I found, 3 or 4 main observations you have, and deal with them one at a time in each of these chunks. You know a lot more about these organizations and these audiences and these influencers than you realize. You've lived with it for a few weeks, and so things that you spotted in week 2 are still relevant and important to put into a big paper, but now you're used to it and you sort of no longer realize it's anything new or interesting, but it is to a new audience. So include that. I'm happy to review drafts. This is a fairly small class. So I can do that. So you can send me drafts. You do not need to include everything generated in class. So we generated some material one week that you thought didn't work for your campaign, your organization, your idea. It doesn't have to be used. When people ask me how long the paper has to be, I always say as long as it needs to be. And they keep pushing me how long. So I'll say they tend to be around 10 pages. Students tend to like to use some graphics. You don't have to. I do want to see a bibliography. I do want to see references and a reference page, etc. But roughly they tend to be around the 10-page range. All right, so that's it. My intention here was just try to give you stuff to help you put this in order. I hope this is a little bit helpful, and I'm happy to do some more of this as we go forward in the next 8 or 9 days and you wrap up this final paper. All right, that's it. Have a great week. Thanks.